Hi, this is Susan Rogers, and you're watching Musicians Reveal with Joe Kelley.
My next guest here on Musicians Reveal is a world-renowned engineer, producer. She was responsible, worked together with Prince for some of his most creative years, 83 to 87. And also, she's an educator, award-winning educator, also an author. We'll talk about all these things in our discussion. We're really honored. We wanted to have her on for so many years. Susan Rogers, Dr. Susan Rogers, welcome to Musicians Reveal.
Thanks, Joe. It's nice to meet you and nice to be here with all of you. So there's always such fun stuff to talk about, when it comes to music. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and you're fresh off the road from a winter trip. And what did you recently? Excuse me. What did you recently do?
I went over to I teach for Berklee College of Music. I'm
Mhm.
not in Boston, but I teach for them now, Berklee Online. And then I also teach for whatever they'll have me do. And I was over in Valencia, Spain, teaching for our campus over there for a week, the music performance and music production students.
How big is the school over there?
What's wonderful about Berkeley Valencia is that it's small. It's
Oh,
small.
okay.
They offer a business degree, they offer a technology degree, and they offer performance and composition degrees. And this is for master's students primarily. And I don't know the numbers, but it's fairly small. And so when you walk around this gorgeous campus, just
Right.
gorgeous, you see the same faces. You get to know people. It's got a really nice intimate vibe to it. Nice studios, and it's run by the marvelous Pablo Manguia. Pablo Manguia, in addition to running the whole program at Berkeley Valencia, he's an audio technician who does things like, well, the most recent Super Bowl audio.
Hmm.
They had him over in New Orleans to do the audio for the Super Bowl.
Wow. Is that the first time?
Oh no, he's done it many years.
Okay.
So they've got great folks over there, and it's always a pleasure to be there.
And how often do you go out there for that?
They usually invite me in February. I didn't go last year, but I went the year before, and I've been quite a few times. Yeah.
Right. And you're recovering a little travel with the cold, right?
I live
Yeah.
out in the woods right now in New York, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm really isolated, so I don't see other people that often. So anytime I travel, I usually bring back some new virus that I haven't
Yeah.
been introduced to yet.
Yeah, you've had such an illustrious career and still, choosing the projects you want to continue to do. Um, a lot of our listeners know you with the work you've done with the Prince Camp. Of course, I do as well, David Byrne. But you were like determined to get into the sound recording business, and at a young age. I mean, I'm reading from way back how determined and what you kind of knew what you wanted to do. Where did it start in California for you?
I'm from Anaheim, California. So I grew up there in the 50s and 60s, and loved music like crazy. Wanted to be somehow involved in the making of records. I had zero interest in being, an A&R executive or manager or in a band. No interest in being a musician myself, but I was really interested in records. For a young woman who started in 1978, like I did, you just didn't see women engineers and producers, even in Los Angeles. And if you were going to see them somewhere, you'd likely to see them in LA, just the law of averages. Even
Right.
if you're less than 1%, there'd be a few of you in Los Angeles. But it was extremely rare. However, I knew that I could study and learn. And I had an aptitude and still do for mechanical things and for systems. And so I was self-taught in electronics and audio basics, which got me a job as a trainee,
Hmm.
an audio trainee, which brought me up through the system and got me trained so that by the time I was doing responsible work, I knew my stuff at that point.
So you were working at Crosby, Stills and Nash record studio, a record company.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Graham Nash and David Crosby had formed a little studio called Rudy Records. We all pronounced it Rudy Records, but it was Rudy Records. And
Oh,
it was
okay.
a one-room studio right in Crossroads of the World, right off Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, right across the street, actually, from Sunset Sound. And Rudy's a nice little studio, one-room studio, which meant you only had one client at a time. But the clients we had were, of course, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. The Eagles were there a couple of times. Bonnie Raitt, early in her career, was around a lot. Jackson Browne, and a lot of those folks from the LA West Coast rock scene of the late '70s were still making a contribution in the early '80s, despite the onslaught of new wave and Talking Heads and
Mhm.
Blondie and the Cars and the new sound of music that was coming along then.
Back then, a lot of shows, I'm sure. Were you a big concert goer?
As much as I could be. I was
Yeah.
just starting out in the music business, and that meant I worked on the job. I was repairing consoles and tape machines as an audio technician. So I had a 40-hour week job Monday through Friday. But then you studied like a freak. I mean, every night and weekends, study in order to stay current, and in order to, in my case, as a beginner, to get up to speed and be great. But when I could, yeah, I saw Talking Heads, I saw Devo, I saw I saw Prince, certainly, so many of the artists I love, The Police. And then occasionally on the gig, there'd be somebody who would gift us with some tickets to some large band would be coming to the Forum. And I remember seeing Queen and seeing the Jacksons and great acts at the Forum as well.
Yeah, and well, I had a question to ask you about, fixing the tape machines, because when I got into radio, when we would do like even a 30-second commercial, it was for us, it was really tedious with moving the reels and marking it and splicing with a razor blade and patching it together. Was it like that with music?
Yeah, and I have great fondness for it because, for all intents and purposes, it's gone the way of the horseshoe. You just
Yeah.
you don't see it that often. Um, but it was, yeah. I mean, somebody was asking me recently in an interview to describe what it was like to sequence albums with Prince, and it just sounds so crude and so quaint the way we did it. But of course, you play the mix, you play the stereo mix on half-inch tape
Mhm.
most of the years when I was with him. Stand at the tape head. I'd be holding a grease pencil,
Right.
and Prince would be next to me, and we'd be listening to music, and it'd be the fade out of the song, and he'd be tapping along with the rhythm. 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3. And I'd just watch for him to nod his head, and then I would mark on the one, sometimes
Mhm.
on the 4, but mostly on the one where he'd want the next song to come in. You mark the tape with the grease pencil, you find the exact spot, and then you cut it with the razor blade, attach the head there, use the splicing tape, listen back to it, take it apart if it doesn't work, or keep it if it does.
So that method, I forgot it. I mean, this is your expertise, but if a mistake happens, do you lose the original? Are there mistakes that happen if the song's lost, or?
Yeah, you could, if you really messed it up, yeah, you could really butcher it. But most of the time, if you have the nice sharp razor blades, which of course you must have, that's your job, engineer, is to make sure they're super sharp. You slice it, splice it, and then you can just take it apart and put it back together, and no one would
Okay.
be the wiser. Remember, at 30 inches per second or 15 inches per second, a
Right.
pretty long piece of tape is going by at a pretty fast clip. And if you've done a nice smooth edit, it won't be heard as it goes over the head. You can fix it.
Yeah. Well, you can. I don't think I could at this point, but yeah. But I remember having to do all that. That was, it
I like,
was fun. Yeah. The carts and everything like that. Yeah.
yeah.
So as Prince's studio technician, you were hired. Let's tell our viewers and listeners the initial hiring by Prince. And it's pretty interesting that, a friend called you, I believe, but let us know about getting into Prince's camp and becoming his side-by-side confidant and music recording guru.
Right. So I was working as a technician in Los Angeles, and was happy with those guys, with Crosby. It was mostly Graham Nash whom I saw, but David Crosby, it was around, and of course Steve, and they were working on the Daylight Again album. It was good, but musically, as much as I liked them, uh, I was younger than those guys. They were just
Mhm.
40, and I was in my late 20s, mid 20s, and I was into the younger music. And Prince was my favorite artist in the world. So my fantasies involved having, I mean, even just being in the studio with him for an hour would have been a dream
Right.
come true. But my good friend at Westlake Audio called me one day. Westlake Audio was a company that was a big name in recording studios and studio packages. Westlake is where Michael Jackson did all of his albums like Thriller and Bad and things like that, where Quincy Jones preferred to work. But anyway, my friend John was a chief tech out there at Westlake, and John called and said, "Hey, Sue, Glenn," meaning Glenn Phoenix, who owned Westlake, Glenn got a phone call from Prince's management saying, "Do you have any technicians on your staff who'd want to leave their gig and move to Minnesota and be Prince's full-time technician?" And Glenn says, "I don't know, let me ask the boys." And he goes back to the shop and he asks around, and right away John Sacchetti says, "Oh, yeah, I know who wants that gig." John called me and said, "You want that gig? It's yours if you want it." Because none of the LA techs had any
Mhm.
interest in leaving their Los Angeles, California gigs, prestigious gigs, and moving to
Right.
Minnesota to work for this guy who nobody
Right.
knew. At that time, Prince was just coming off the 1999 tour, so he wasn't a superstar. He was a minor star that had had one crossover hit. Big star in R&B, but not so much. And even then in R&B, his music wasn't pure R&B. So he was this fringe guy. Anyway, I got that phone call from John, and I told John, "Tell Glenn, don't interview anybody else because that's my gig. I'll get that job." Uh,
Wow.
Glenn talked to me. I said, "Yeah, I want it." Glenn determined that I was qualified. He sent me over to Prince's management. They interviewed me. We negotiated a contract right there, and I they said, "Pack your bags," and off I went.
So your dream job right in there as as a technician. Did you ever find out why he was in need of a different technician?
Yes, the person he had working for him was a fellow who was a local guy in Minnesota who had worked in a stereo store but hadn't worked in the pro audio industry. And I was told later that Prince told his management, "Get me someone from New York or LA." He
Mhm.
needed someone who, had worked on multi-track tape machines and large mainframe consoles and things like that, which the local guy, of course, had no experience with. So out there in Minnesota, in any of these cities, they can be major cities, but if it's not an industry town, you're going to be
Mhm.
really hard pressed to find parts and to find experienced folks to work on your equipment. Um, so yeah, Prince needed to get someone from either New York, LA, or Nashville who who knew their stuff and had repaired a lot of equipment. And at that point, I was 5 years into my career, and I fit the bill.
And you had a big send off birthday party send off from LA out to Minnesota on the night, a big event for Prince. Tell us about that night.
Bad timing too, because
Yeah.
I wish I had been at that damn show. If I
Right.
just could have been out in Minnesota a week earlier, but I couldn't. They hired me, and I needed time, of course, to pack up my stuff. A moving truck was going to come out and bring my things to Minnesota, but my friends and folks at Rudy Records gave me a going away party, which coincided with my birthday, which was August 3rd, which coincided with the day of that famous First Avenue show
Right.
where Prince recorded many of the bed tracks for the Purple Rain album, including Purple Rain and I Would Die for You, Baby I'm a Star. So as soon as I arrived from California at Minnesota, one of the first things we had to deal with was pulling out this console in his studio, putting a new one in, a new recording console, repairing a tape machine. There was some work to be done there, but there were these big boy, it'd be hard for your listeners to imagine if they haven't seen these things, but 14-inch reels. Now, on a 2-inch tape normally comes on these 10-inch reels. They're big
Mhm.
enough and they're fairly heavy. But if you're going to record for twice as long, like at a live concert, you want the 14-inch reels. And it would be like almost like an IMAX film canister. It's a big, heavy thing. Not as big as IMAX, but still, they're big and heavy. Anyway, Prince had these reels, and they had to be put up on his tape machine, and individual songs had to be cut out, put on separate reels so that we could then do some post-production. He always did post-production on live performances. I mean, even it was just adding, additional audience screams. It was always something. But yeah, you touch up some background instrumentation and maybe you add some backing vocals or flesh things out a little bit. So we did post-production on many of those tracks.
Do you remember? Oh, go ahead.
No, that was it.
No, do you remember the first song you ever worked together with him on?
I remember the first tape I put up, which was different than the first one we worked together on. The first tape he had me put up was Darling Nikki. He had completed it. It's one of the tracks he did all by himself, or maybe his outgoing technician had helped him with it, but his equipment was usually left set up and routed, so he could do a lot of work on his own. Darling Nikki on the Purple Rain album was the first thing I heard. He had me put up the stereo mix for some reason, and I remember playing it alone in his home studio, which was just a little bedroom studio, no bigger than the room I'm in right now. And listening to that Darling Nikki on those big Westlake monitors up there. Westlake monitors have, on each monitor has two 18-inch woofers. So two 18-inch woofers on each side. Massive. And listening to Darling Nikki, talk about having your hair blown back. As a Prince fan, I was practically levitating how exciting this was. And there I was, with the master tape right there. But the first thing we worked on was a song for Jill Jones, his protege, one of his many proteges. And it was a song called Mia Boca.
Right. Yeah, Jill's actually, when we did the show in Connecticut, because we were based out of Connecticut, Fairfield University, before the pandemic hit, Jill came to the studio and performed in the studio live. So that was cool. Really nice lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. She worked on a second album with Prince, right? That never got released.
Well,
did you work on that one or other songs?
When I was with him, there was the first album. I think it was just called Jill Jones. Had that pink and gray cover. Yeah. I don't remember a second album. It might have been later. It might have been after my time with him. Maybe I've forgotten it, but I don't remember that. More than one album for Sheila E., of course. And well, I guess it was Apollonia 6. I did one record for Apollonia 6. A lot of those things came really fast.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you signed up for it and you were gung-ho, but he didn't give you a lot of leadway, right? As far as what he was going to do and what you were needed for?
Practically none. Like I learned that if he was paying you a salary, and he was not cheap, I'm not saying that we all became millionaires, but he was not a skinflint for sure. He was generous. So I was being paid well for my age and years of experience, and getting not an hourly salary, of course, getting a weekly paycheck. For that weekly paycheck, you were his. Meaning if you were asked to work all 160 hours a week that are in a week, that's what you work.
Right.
You do anything that's called for. And what he called for was quite a lot. Of course, I couldn't have been happier because he's my favorite artist in the world. And he's transitioning me from the role of technician, which I'm doing, but he doesn't need his equipment to be worked on. He needs his equipment to be worked with. So as soon as things are up and running, immediately, of course, we're recording. And he just put me right in the recording chair, because why deal with another person? He wouldn't necessarily say, because he was not a good communicator. He didn't like to tell you what was going to happen. But oftentimes, especially as we got to know each other much better, what he would do is just leave me a written note sitting on the console saying, set up, all these things. And I'd get it set up, and then we'd work from there.
So would you run tape as soon as you knew he was ready to go?
Yeah, sort of, kind of. Because tape is unlike hard drives for the young listeners today. You don't have an infinite supply of it. You have a very, very finite supply. So first you get your sounds. Of course, you can record over tape, but it would have been wasteful to have been recording if we're not ready. So and he got ready pretty quickly. So whether we were at rehearsal, recording at rehearsal with the whole band, he'd give me the signal, obviously, like, okay, we're set, roll tape. But if it
Mhm.
was just the two of us, um, he'd spend a little minute with the tape machine on input, getting his drum machine programmed and getting the sounds that he wanted, or an acoustic drum kit if that's what he was playing. And then once we were ready to roll, then roll tape.
You know, our mutual friend Dwayne Tudall, you know, his books are like the Bible for reference on, and I'm every time I read or reread the books, I'm always amazed. First of all, the studio time that was booked, and you and Prince actually used the time, but going back and forth and sequencing and remixing and overdubbing and stuff like that. Did you have a lot of input as far as song order and selection?
No,
You didn't ask so much?
very few people did, because at that time, maybe later engineers did, but at that time, Prince was his creativity was on fire. He knew
Mhm.
exactly what he wanted. It took a long time, a lot of trial and error, not within songs, but across songs to figure out which songs were going to provide the kernel or seed for the next album. Because if you're going to release an album, you've got a look that goes with it. You've got a color scheme that goes with it. You're thinking about your live show and what the stage is going to look like, what the artwork is going to look like. You're thinking about videos. You're thinking about the extra musical support for the ideas expressed on that record. And the ideas expressed are the main theme. This is where I'm at right now, is what you're saying to your fans. These are the
Right.
things that are on my mind, and here's how I want to express those things musically. So music was always being recorded at the time when I was with him, but there were no definitive start and stop dates for albums necessarily, because music was always being recorded. Something that had been done a month ago could go on
Mhm.
the next album, or something that was done last night would go on the next album, or something done a year ago, uh, depending on how he was building songs around the core of his
So
materials. You know,
so
yeah.
yeah.
To finish up to your by answering your question, uh, he didn't need to consult with others as to what should go on the album or not. I was, of course, consulted whenever he had any doubts about certain messages on songs, or
Mhm.
he had doubts about I don't know what fans might like the best.
Did you ever wish that Prince collaborated more with more well-established stars like himself along the way, or do you think it was just the point in his career that it woulda maybe slowed things up or not worked as well?
Certain things that you think about and you go, "Oh, wouldn't it have been great if that could have happened?" And then when you really think about it, how it would have worked, you realize it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
Um, it'd be great to have Prince collaborate with Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, any number of people you want to think of, but the Prince I knew was so tuned into his own radio station
Mhm.
that collaboration would have first involved stripping back some of his own impulses, because he had impulses for drums and bass and keys and guitar and vocals. Most people would focus on their instrument and bring their instrument to another with which to collaborate. But in Prince's case, he was a one-man band. So the
Yeah.
collaboration didn't leave room for another person's talents. Without him having to erase some of his own.
And I guess the vocals, it's legendary that he wanted to record by himself and maybe
Mhm.
give you a little chance to catch some sleep, or no, or you had to be there all the time?
Yeah, 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 you try to, you'd try to, but it would be too embarrassing to be caught sleeping on his watch. So if he's in
Yes.
there doing a vocal, I just
Yeah.
would be too embarrassed. I know you mentioned Dwayne Tudall, and is
Yeah.
close friends with Peggy McCreary out there in Sunset Sound in Los Angeles. Peggy
Mhm.
was another recording engineer, worked with
Right.
Prince a lot. She was a staff engineer at Sunset, whereas I was Prince's employee. So anyway, Um, Peggy would catch some sleep. She wasn't embarrassed by that, but for me, I couldn't do it. I would fall
Yeah.
asleep, of course, out of exhaustion, but I was
Right.
always embarrassed.
Did you have a preference doing recordings out in Minnesota, or did you like going back to your home state in Sunset Sound?
Oh, Sunset was much easier because it was at that time, this is before Paisley Park Studios was up and running.
Right.
Um, Sunset was a world-class studio, and with a support system, they had people answering the phone. They had maintenance folks there. They had audio technicians. I could work with Peggy, so there were two of us to work together. When we were home in Minnesota, I was the only one at that time when I was with him. So there was either a home studio or there was rehearsal, and if anything broke down, I was the only one to fix it. And there weren't always people around to run errands, to run out and bring me a cup of coffee or a sandwich or something. It was harder. Again, I don't feel any sense of self-pity or complaint because you gotta understand how lucky I was to be there. Gratitude was I mean, it was hard, and there were times when I was frustrated and angry, but gratitude was always the base layer of emotion.
And you had one of the most desirable gigs in the whole music industry, I'm sure.
For me, I did. Other
Yeah.
people, weren't such Prince fans and would not have traded places with me, but, a lot of people would have.
Would did you at the time when you were working with Prince, did you ever receive any tempting offers from other artists to join up with them?
Not a single one.
Oh, come
No.
on. They were missing out, but good thing you stayed.
No, 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 nobody. In fact, after I left Prince, I honestly didn't know. I really honestly did not know
Mhm.
who was gonna hire me because I had joined him as a technician. I was a naive engineer. I had no other engineering credits than with him, and, I just wondered I didn't know what to do. I thought about, well, I don't know. I thought, "No, I wanna stay in Minnesota. I like it here. Should I apply at radio stations? Maybe they need a technician." I considered that. Ultimately, shortly after Prince, I got a phone call, and it was from the Jacksons, the family, uh, and they said, "We're doing an album, 2300 Jackson Street."
Mhm.
It's the brothers, but without Michael, and they said, "We'd like you to work with us on it." And I said, "Okay." And I came back to Los Angeles, and I worked with the Jacksons straight away after Prince.
Now we'll get into your book and other endeavors you've accomplished and still continue to accomplish since you left the Prince camp. But um, the Purple Rain, we talked about Purple Rain, and March 5th, I believe, select theaters Purple Rain, the movie is going to be shown for one night only with enhanced things. You would know better than I. What is it difficult to enhance audio and video for a film like that?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know about audio for film, but I can safely say the answer is no, not difficult because the new the digital audio tools today are insane what they're capable
Right.
of doing. So imagine it's pretty easy. Enhance though is a funny word because sometimes albums, classic albums, will be remastered for streaming or remastered for. Remember when they were remastering them for CD, and sometimes
Yeah.
they would
Right.
sound like utter crap. Um, where they'd remaster them and in attempts to improve them, they'd take away some of what made it sound cool.
And you were part of the Purple Rain tour, a big part of it, as far
Mm.
as he recorded often on the tour, and you were out in the truck, right, during the shows?
Yeah, he liked to have a mobile recording truck at the big cities. So if we were in New York, at the Superdome in New Orleans near the end of the tour, in Los
Mhm.
Angeles, we'd have a mobile recording truck. Atlanta, I believe. No, not Atlanta. Atlanta, we went to a recording studio afterward. But yeah, there were several cities where we would have a big mobile truck and record the show. And on those nights, I would be out in the truck.
Yeah, I think I saw the Purple Rain tour 5 times, but the last time I went to it was the Nassau Coliseum when he switched to a matinee show because he was flying out to the Oscar awards,
Yeah.
and this was before Will Call had his act together, and we were we were out in line, still didn't have our tickets. The line was crazy. I hear Sheely set in the parking lot. Then I hear Prince play 17 Days to open up his set, and we only got in for the encore in Purple Rain.
What a
So yeah,
shame.
but it was madness back then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's a shame. Well,
No, we saw 4 entire shows of
you
the tour.
saw them
So
other
yeah,
times.
yeah. Let's talk about an important project you released a couple years ago, your own book, collaboration with Olgi, and This Is What It Sounds Like, right?
Uh-huh.
Tell us about the genesis of um, you wanted to put a book together and what people can gain from all
Right.
people. Yeah.
So I think it was 2019. It's been a while now,
Hmm.
coming up on 6 years. Ogie Ogos is a professional co-author. That's what he does. He finds people who've got knowledge in some interesting area, and he approaches them and says, "You want to take your knowledge and turn it into a book?" And I had been asked that before, but he was the first legitimate author to invite me. He asked me to write a book on music, and I said, "Well, you don't want me because I'm a non-musician. But what I can write about is music listening. I've been a music listener either as a record maker, as a producer and engineer, or now as an auditory neuroscientist. I've been studying the consumption of music and what that's like. I can write about that." So he said yes, and I just put a lot of clay on the table, things I'd learned in grad school and things I learned, of course, in the recording studio for 22 years, things I learned from students, from teaching, and put all this clay on the table, and we shaped it into a, um, a thesis. And what this book describes, and it is for a lay audience, not for
Okay.
experts, it describes music listening in terms of the various dimensions of recorded music that can give us a treat. When I say treat, I mean a release of dopamine, pleasure,
Hmm.
sense of pleasure from listening. Certainly, any of the musical elements like the melody or the lyrics or the rhythm, the sounds can give you the pleasure that you're seeking when you choose to listen to that particular record in that moment in time. But also, there's stylistic things, overarching aesthetic things like the performance quality and like the style or the innovation on the record, things like that. So it's a model to help you find your listener profile, the aspects of music that give you the sense that this record is perfect for you. Each one of us has a listener profile. Each one is unique. It's shaped by our own unique experiences. And if you are a musician or if you work in the music business, um, that's what you walk in the room with. That's what they pay you for, is your
Hmm.
listener profile. They pay you for how you hear music, not how anyone else hears it.
Now, for the profile of myself, I was going through some of the areas. I would consider myself more rhythmic, but do you have different percentages of each one? Does it fluctuate?
I've never learned anything about that. I don't think that's ever been studied. Um, what happens is when we put on a record, let's say it's a familiar record, one that we know
Mhm.
really well. We're choosing in this given moment. You think to yourself, you know, it'd be good right now. I want to listen to some music. Yeah, I think I'll listen to, and the
Mhm.
choice you make from your wide and varied music library is going to be driven by just what you're in the mood for. And in many cases, it could be the rhythm. I just want that feel right now. Other times, you want something introspective, and it might be your lyrics. Other times, you're thinking to yourself, I did this recently. I want to hear what's cool, what's hip today. What are people doing that's really cool? Student told me about the new Tyler the Creator album, so I put that on, and I really liked it. Someone
Mhm.
else told me, a friend said, "Check out the new Billie Eilish," so I put on that. So I wouldn't say that we're necessarily listening for predominantly one dimension over the other. It
Okay.
has to do more with what you're in the mood for in the moment, and also where you find those treats. So back to my example, you put on a familiar record, and your brain, if you know it's it's got that groove you like, your brain is going to go right for those drums and bass, lock onto it, and you're going to be in your happy place. Now, it might drift over and listen to the lyrics. It might say, I never really noticed before, but that guitar tone is actually kind of thin. It might go to the sounds. But for the most part, you know where your treat is, and you listen for that and you enjoy it. When we're listening to a brand new record that we've never heard before, we
Mhm.
scan those elements to ask ourselves, does this please me or not? And really, all you have to do is find one element that really hits you strongly and makes you think or feel more than think. I really
I
like that. That's really nice.
Yeah, I know when I'm in my car and have to go do food shopping just to get it out of the way, I'm pumping Prince or Parliament, Funkadelic, so
Yeah, right.
yeah, yeah,
I'm a rhythm lover myself, and if a rhythm isn't strong on a record, those other
mhm,
dimensions better be really strong in order
right.
to keep and hold my attention. Yeah.
And another thing with the book, and the best site people can go to is, thisiswhatitsoundslike.com?
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah, right. The record pool, I found that really interesting and, reading on exactly what it is, tell us about your record pool. Pool,
A
pull.
pull, yeah, a pull, like a song pull, but a record pull. It's something that record makers used to do back in my day, which was a
Uh,
while back, but, sometimes, it would take 3 months to make a full-length album, and there
mhm,
are nights when, there's still some studio time left, but you're just tapped out, you're creatively spent,
right.
and, occasionally, in order to just have a good time and bond with each other and recharge your batteries, you'd want to have a record pull. A record pull is like a song pull. In a song pull, you pass a guitar around the room. In a record pull, you essentially are passing a record around the room. Um, what you do, and it needs to be a small group of people. Too many people takes too long. But 4, 5, 6 people,
Mhm.
each person brings a record or two. By that I mean recorded music of a song that just makes them weak in the knees, that they just love. Ideally, it's a song that your pool mates don't know. That's perfect. So it might be an obscure album cut by a famous artist, or it might be the single from an artist no one has heard of, things like that. And
And you
your
yeah,
job is, yeah, you have to describe why this record and not that record. What is it about
uh,
this record that you love so much? You're giving your playmates insight into what kind of listener you are and what sorts of musical gestures you love. It's a very generous act. You're taking them into your psyche. Here's a record that represents me. You have to trust your playmates that they won't judge you or make fun of you for your choices. And the other bonus is you're getting to know your friends a lot better because they're doing the same for you. It's a really wonderful thing. It's really fun to have a record pull.
how about people in relationships, their partners, have different musical tastes and can't stand the other people's taste? I'm lucky. My wife's a, funk fan and Prince fan, but,
Nice.
how difficult is that?
I've asked people about that, musician friends. Could you be really close with someone if their musical taste was utterly foreign to you? Most people in the music business, anyway, say that no, they couldn't. They have to be able
Okay.
to relate to other people with music. Occasionally, though, you get those people who will say, "Yeah, my spouse has horrible taste in music." Yeah, it is.
Right.
It's a very good way for parents and their children, grown children or otherwise, to get to know each other. I
Mhm.
think when a young person can show mom and dad, this speaks to me. I think it would behoove mom and dad to pay attention to that because our musical loves are showing us an aspect of ourselves that is probably not made public, but which down deep inside we either aspire to be or in our fantasy world maybe are. For example, I mean, why would I love Tyler the Creator? Why would I love Public Enemy? Why would I love Lana Del Rey? Why would I
Mhm.
love Bob Dylan? I'm not like any of those people, but on some level,
Yeah.
I like to think that I am, and I feel that I'm like them. It's a principle called self-congruence. We like those artists who on some level seem to match our sense of self.
Well, let's move up to we'll go back to the Prince. I got a couple questions about Prince a little later on, but I wanted to get to the period where 1987 or thereabouts, Prince was Paisley Park was getting ready to open 87, 88, right?
87, June of 87.
Okay. Did you know that you were going to leave, or tell us about the process of how you decided to leave, or what
Well, it
happened?
was decided for me. Paisley came online. It was summer, early summer of '87. There was still some nuts and bolts to be tightened down and wires to be connected, but it was more or less working. And now, for the first time in my time with Prince, we now had a staff of some assistant engineers. We had more than one room, so there could be sessions going on in Studio A and Studio B, and even Studio C. So it was a whole new way of working. We had a full-time technician. We had the great Sal Greco, who was
Mhm.
completely in charge and had been since the Purple Rain tour, in charge of the technical stuff. So my role in Prince's life could change. It was now an opportunity where if there was going to be a change, this would be a good moment for it. I was getting increasingly really burnt out.
Mhm.
I'd just worked 15 years worth of work in the last 4 years or so. And Prince was after the revolution, the upheaval of the revolution, and having the band leave and Sheila's band come in and all these new people and this new place and this new way of working, it was just time for him to make a change. We fell out in it was September or October, something like that, of '87, and decided we would go our separate ways. I was out in Los Angeles
Mhm.
working on post production on the audio for the Sign of the Times concert film. He was at home in Minnesota at Paisley Park, and he tried to reach me one night over the phone. And for the first time in all these years, I was unavailable. It just so happened that that night I was out on a date. I hadn't been on a date in 4 years, over four
Wow.
years. No, no family life, no holidays, nothing. And I had
Right.
met someone out there in LA and gone on a stupid date. And Prince was not happy that he couldn't reach me. Got on a plane, flew out to LA, cornered me on the post production stage the next day, and we
Wow.
went into a vocal booth, and he demanded to know why I was unreachable. And at that point, I we kind of went toe to toe, and I kind of said, standing up for myself, occasionally I will need to be unreachable. And we
Mm.
both knew we've come to the end of the road here because he needed something that I could no longer provide. And he should have
Right.
whatever it is he needs.
Yeah. I mean, your place in history with yourself and Prince is forever going to be there. But I could see where it came to that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he uh, bless his heart. I have the. I hope it's obvious that I have the highest respect
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
admiration for him. But how that young man, he was young when I knew him, how he managed to cope with everything he dealt with,
Mhm.
I can't fathom. Which is why I have admiration for him because he did not go off the rails, and a lesser being would have. Um, it taught me how hard this business is. It taught me how ridiculously hard it is at the highest level, particularly when you're essentially alone. This isn't Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. It's not, I don't know, Lennon and McCartney. It's not Elton John and Bernie Taupin. It's one guy.
Mhm.
And to make these decisions on his own, he's got a band and everything, but still, at the end of the day, it comes down to him. Um, he needed to do things his way, right or wrong.
And seeing him on tour all along those years and recording, did you see any effect from the touring as far as, I mean, he pushed through everything, but
I know.
how difficult was it for him that you could see?
He had a will of iron. I was thinking because I have a cold right now. I was thinking of this the other day that we would get sick, of course, we'd come down with colds, but you never took a day off. You didn't not show up. You never called in sick. He never did. He
Mhm.
never the time I was with him, he never canceled a show. And the medicine he would take is Dayquil. He
Oh,
just
okay.
orange bottles of Dayquil to make it onto stage. Um, Tough guy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And we love the splits. We as fans, we loved it all. But
Yeah.
yeah, just a unique performer. Uh, on to other people you've worked with from the Prince camp, Wendy and Lisa, great musicians. You worked on 2 of the records, right?
I worked on, yeah, I worked on Fruit at the Bottom, the second album that they
Mhm.
did after Prince, and then also the Eroica album.
Okay.
Mm.
So in the studio, were they different than working with Prince?
They're my friends, so yeah, I mean, when we were together, it's working with friends. People you hang out with when you're not working. Where Prince, I can't call him a friend because we didn't have that relationship. It
Right.
was a friendly working relationship, and we did do some non-work stuff together, but not friends. But with Wendy and Lisa, yeah, it's different. They're not as fast as Prince. Their art is similar to how most people create, in that
Mhm.
there's more experimentation involved.
And they weren't chasing you around town on your dates, right? To see where you are.
No, 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 no.
Right.
No, they're
Yeah.
normal human
Yeah.
beings.
Yeah. Jesse Johnson, Every Shade of Love. You worked on
Yeah.
that record, right? Yeah. Where did he record Every Shade of Love, or was it in different spots?
At that time, we did some he had a home studio, um, in his home in Blaine, Minnesota. After he left Prince, he and, Teresa, his wife, they had a condominium in Blaine, and he had a home studio there. And
Mhm.
so after Prince and before I left and went out and worked for the Jacksons out in California, I was still in Minnesota for a few months, and Jesse and I did some work together, that home studio in Blaine. Yeah, I know he did some of those recordings elsewhere as well, because he was signed to A&M Records, and they were based out of, Los Angeles. But, the stuff I did with him was at home, at his home.
And he bought Prince's console, right? One of the old ones?
Yeah, he bought one of the old consoles, yeah.
Right. Um, you're a big Talking Heads fan. I
Mm.
am as well. David Byrne, how did that come about that you were working with him on a couple records?
Yeah, I am a lucky person because a lot of my dreams just seem to come true. Uh, what happened was I had a manager at that time when I was an independent engineer, mixer, producer, and my manager, recommended me for the David Byrne gig. I
Mhm.
don't remember doing a producer audition with David. In fact, I didn't. I didn't do a producer. A producer audition is where assigned artists will meet with various producers before deciding who to hire. But anyway, David had hired, Mitchell Froom and Chad Blake. Chad is so great. I
Yeah.
don't know Mitchell, but anyway, they were a great, successful team. However, after 1 week in the studio, David realized this isn't the right producer engineer for him, for the record
Okay.
he wanted to make. And I got a phone call on a Sunday night from my manager saying, "Can you get on a plane and go to New York in the morning to work with David Byrne?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, of course I can." So I flew out from Los Angeles out to New York thinking, "Oh my God, this is David Byrne. What am I going to say to this guy?" He's already in the studio. He already had studio time booked. No
Mhm.
time for pre-production or going through the material or getting to know each other. None of that. It was just be thrown right in, do the engineering, and then co-produce the David Byrne album along with Arto Lindsay.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, I got out there and we made it work. In hindsight, boy, do I wish I had gotten that record, from the downbeat. I wish I could have worked on that record, conceptually, from the beginning. Not that I'm making excuses for it. I love the record and I'm happy with it, but I didn't get involved until it was actually already underway. I do love him, and he's
Mhm.
fantastic to work with. He's funny as hell.
Mhm.
He's got a great sense of humor, and he was really actually a joy to work with.
And he rides a bicycle around Manhattan, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, his bike.
You're a Talking Heads fan, so I got a quick Talking Heads story for you. We're friends with Chris France and Tina Weymouth,
Ah,
and this I'll tie in a little sound story to you. We went to their house. They invited us because they've been to the studio back in Connecticut a bunch of times on our show, but they recorded live at the clubhouse for the Tom Tom Club in their living room. Two shows. The first show, and here's the sound thing. Their recording studio was from a detached barn garage on the second level, but the lady who was dancing in front of us had metallic, she had braids, but she had metal things as she was dancing was clanging up the whole show. When they went to listen in between the sets, they had to scrap it, but they probably could have saved it today, right? Something like that.
yeah, yeah. I think Isotope makes tools that will remove specific
Oh,
things.
okay. Yeah, they released the record, but it was, probably from the second set, but it was cool. Nice people.
Yeah, I heard. I have a producer friend named Glenn Rosenstein who worked with Tom Tom Club and told me some good stories too about working with them.
Yeah. Well, do you have hopes that it'll ever come Talking Heads before our lifetimes are over to get back together?
Sure, why not? Although I know that it's not something that David wants. And
Yeah.
all those years with Prince taught me, like, just let that artist follow their own, let them follow the trail that they're following, and uh, don't worry about it, because they're gonna go where they're gonna go, and anything that their heart isn't really in, it's not gonna
Mhm.
turn out well anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So, and he's the crucial one to get in in there. So,
Yeah, true.
yeah. One I wanted to ask you about a record. I'm a big fan of Slapback. You worked on Fast Food Funketeers, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you work the whole record?
I might have. That was one that, was, for one thing, it was a long time ago, and
Mhm,
it took me a while to transition, as it naturally would, from being an engineer as I was with Prince, and of course with Prince you also mixed, but mixing for Prince was unlike mixing for anyone else because of Prince's unique way of arranging his records.
mhm.
So transitioning into becoming a mixer for records I hadn't engineered. That took me a little bit a minute, and it was also the same kind of a transition to becoming a producer. So the work I did with Slapback was some of my early attempts at production and also mixing for an artist that wasn't Prince. Although I do remember having a good time with those guys, and I was proud of having worked on that record. Although my skills, what I'm trying to say is my skills weren't honed at that point.
Right. Bare Naked Ladies and Rusted Root. This might have been like their early start. They performed at Fairfield University where I did the radio show, like a show outdoors. There's three guys, right?
Bare Naked Ladies?
No, no, no. Rusted Root. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
Rusty Root. No, they were 7 guys when they
Oh,
started.
seven guys. Okay.
It was 6 when I worked with them.
Okay. Bare Naked Ladies, a big, big band that you work with from Canada, and you
Yeah.
you love those guys, right?
Oh, they are funny and really smart, and, now that Stephen Page is no longer with the group, I'm friends with Stephen as a solo artist and
Mhm.
friends with, Ed and the other guys as well. They really are wonderful people, and they're a joy to work with, and really talented. I mean, really talented. If you were to think about bands and artists that have been together a long time and have written a lot of hit songs, they'd be right up there at the top of the list. They've had a lot of hit records. Great songwriters, the two of them, Stephen and Ed.
And speaking of a Canadian tie-in, you went on into the education field, studied at McGill.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I did.
Now, what was the decision to go up to McGill and tell us about the focus of your studies up there?
Well, when I was in the music business, coming up on the late 90s, I was really hitting my stride. And in 98, I had the number one record as a producer with Bare Naked Ladies, and
Mhm.
I had had number one records as a mixer, and I was doing really well. I was very, very busy in 97, 98, 99. And that was right around the time I realized that now I would like to leave the music business and have a second career because I imagined I would like being a scientist, doing the work of a scientist. At this point, I'm in my mid-40s, and I was no longer listening to college radio, not as much as I had been. Um, so I had a hit record with Bare Naked Ladies, and with the money you made in those days, I could afford to actually transition out of the music business into college as a freshman. Um, University of Minnesota. I did 4 years at the U of M and then went straight up north to continue my education and earn my PhD at McGill in Montreal. My PhD, I was in a program in behavioral neuroscience, specializing in music perception and cognition.
Oh, okay. And McGill, my wife's from Montreal, so she worked at University of Montreal, so I know the city really well. Where'd you live when you were up there?
Marché Atwater. You know where
Oh, okay.
Marché Atwater is? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, right.
it's a little bit down the hill from McGill,
Right.
right near
Yeah,
the.
it's a great, great city and the jazz festival. Did you go to the festival when you were
Yes,
up there?
I did. When it
Yeah,
came, yeah, I did. The Just for Laughs festival, and it's
right.
yeah, I love it there. I
Yeah.
really love
We actually, speaking of Prince, we went to see when he played at I think it's Wilfred Pelletier, the
it. Yeah,
theater for the
yeah.
Jazz Fest. And I saw something online that the director of the festival, they were having an anniversary a few years ago. He still names, I think it was 2001, the show Prince did up there as his all-time favorite show of the entire festival. And
Unbelievable.
we saw that show. We were in the second row, and
Ooh,
Prince had the stage lights. I don't know. Did you go to that show?
no, I wasn't there in 2001. I was an undergrad.
Okay, so yeah, he turned the lights pretty much down. Sometimes he was singing in the mic, not into the mic. It was like a Miles Davis kind of thing. So, and then there was an intermission, and it came with the Prince spectacle with the hits and everything. So,
That was the greatest thing about working for him, is being elbow to elbow with that guy in a chair next to him as he sat there with a single instrument, which might be a keyboard, it might be a guitar, it could be just about anything. Well, he didn't play brass, but yeah, I mean, the various instruments that he played at such a high level was quite astonishing. And to be next to him as he worked through on a synthesizer, for example, patches, as he worked through timbres to choose for his arrangements, and as he, of course, came up with those arrangements, is this going to be percussive, staccato, legato? Uh, is it going to be counter melody? Is it going to be melodic? What's it going to complement? Listening to that mind put together
oh,
pieces systematically, one after the other. Well, that's a rare opportunity to be next to a musical genius as he's actually um, in a creative mode. And he's experimenting because you're hearing what he accepts and what he rejects. I mean, if only, we could do that with all of our favorites. If I could do that with Brian Wilson, if I could
oh.
do that with the guitar player Jimmy Page, or just any of the greats that I love, be there with them. So coming through those parts. Oh man, how great.
How about the Camille voice? What's the first track you worked when he used the sped up vocals?
I don't know the first one I did. I know when I joined him, right around the time I joined him,
Mhm.
uh, is when he did Erotic City.
Yeah.
Remember Erotic City? I think
Oh
it was
yeah.
just released as just a single, but not as it wasn't on an album. Anyway, that was the very speed voice. I think it was probably Peggy McCreary at Sunset Sound that showed him how to do that. But you just change the speed of the tape machine, sing it in the higher or lower key depending on how you change it, and then you bring it back to the speed you want, and you either get a much lower voice, which we didn't do often, or the much higher voice. And that he sometimes called it the Camille voice.
Yeah, one of the things I missed from the era that you worked on was the 12-inch extended versions that you guys all did. Later, it seems like he farmed a little of that out. And
Yeah.
to be honest, I love when the stuff that you guys put out because we're
Oh,
buying vinyl and yeah,
yeah. And what a lot of people don't realize is, there'll be the tracks you love on the album, which will be 3.5 minutes long,
right.
but the actual album versions of those tracks could be 7 or 8 minutes long. You Got the Look, for example. It's very,
Yeah.
very long. And he'd play from tip to tail, and
Mhm.
only the first 3.5 minutes or so would be designated as a single or as an album cut, because in the days of vinyl, you could only fit so much on a record. But for example, the song America from the album Around the World in a Day, it took up at 30 inches per second of tape. You get, if you're lucky, you get 17 minutes worth of music, which is about the side of a vinyl album. It took up the
Mhm.
whole side. It took up a full 17 minutes. The band just played until the tape ran out.
Wow. Yeah, I've got that in the closet over there. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
that was a fun track. Yeah.
yeah. Um, you were the influential person in getting Prince's vault together, which is legendary.
Mm.
I wanted to ask you about the early start to putting the vault together, maybe where you consider it now, but um, with that much music, and probably he didn't want to sit down at night cataloging it himself. Did you come up with that idea to get it
I
all safe and
did.
sound?
Not in that form, but what happened was when I joined him, right away he would just he just assumed I knew everything, because why is he knew it. He was smart enough to know I didn't, but it was his way of letting me know you need to know. So he would say, "Get me the tape of," I think the first one he asked for was Bambi. Remember the song Bambi
Yeah,
that
yeah,
the early
yeah.
records? "Get me Bambi." Where the hell's Bambi? How should I know? I just got here an hour ago. So it became clear that I needed to know where everything was. Anything he asked for, I needed to know. So in those rare moments I had when I could, I just started find all the tapes. Are they in the office? They're in his house. They're in his studio. They're out in Los Angeles at Sunset Sound. Get all these tapes. And then I got kind of emboldened, and I started calling, where else could they be? This guy's, I thought of him as a huge star from a very early year. I
Mhm.
realized he was going to be massive before Purple Rain came out. I want all his tapes at his home in one place. So I started calling studios in Minnesota where he had worked, and other studios in Los Angeles where he had worked, and just saying, "What do you have in your tape closet? Here's our FedEx number. Send that tape." Then I got even more bold, and I started calling Warner Brothers, his label out in Burbank, and saying,
Mhm.
talking to the guy in the tape closet or the tape vault there, and saying, "Yeah, Prince wants the master of this and that." I was naive, so I could get away with that crap, and they were
Right.
naive too, because they were just entry level employees, and they'd send me things. Right away, it became too much for me to have the time to catalog, but Prince had office staff, and they
Okay.
came up with a system for cataloging everything in a database, an early database, 1983. And then before Paisley Park Studios was built, we found a local storage facility that stored important records in a temperature climate controlled space. Um, which gave us a 7 day a week, 24-hour a day access. All we had to do was call them at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "We'll be there in 5 minutes, have someone meet us there." They would meet us, they'd pull down certain bins, we'd pull out the tapes. Prince loved it. He was really happy with that system. He really liked it. So of course, when we drew up plans to build Paisley Park Studios, it included a vault. He wanted
Yeah.
his own personal private vault with all of his recordings. By 1994, you couldn't get the door of that thing closed. It was so
Wow.
full.
And, it's funny with the vault, he requested a couple times copies of cassette tapes. Back then, it was cassette tapes of our radio shows we had done on his specials,
Mm,
and one of them, he sends an email to me, just very brief. It was from AOL. It was like, "I noticed the pitch on Erotic City was a little slow," or something, and I
mm.
asked the guest who was on the show, "Did you notice anything off?" And he didn't notice, but we didn't make the music, so
Wow. Huh,
yeah.
huh.
It's really crazy stuff. Yeah.
Really, truly. Yeah, that's
Yeah. From the things that since he passed, have you been involved with, I know you with Sign of the Times, you were heavily involved with getting that together, but, the full accounting of what's in the vault, have you been involved with a lot of it?
I was contacted after his passing. The the person who got involved with content management after Prince's passing is a very fine, fine gentleman. He was a senior VP at Warner Brothers Records. His name is Michael Howe. He's not at
Oh,
Warner
okay, yeah.
Brothers anymore, but Michael Howe was put in charge of the first posthumous releases. And Michael Howe had an impossible task. You can't, I mean, if Prince was awake, he wanted to have a musical instrument in his hands. And if he
Mhm.
had an instrument in his hands, he wanted to be recording it. So the lifetime of recorded material he left behind was infinite in scope. So Michael had to figure out what to release and where is it. And one of the things he needed to know was what's in there, what hasn't been released yet. So he made the smart decision to contact Prince's recording engineers to ask, what do you got? And
Right.
also to contact bootleggers. Bootleggers, I see our video is frozen. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, it just unfroze. Anyway,
Okay.
Michael contacted bootleggers, European bootleggers, to ask them about titles. Turned
Mhm.
out they were keeping databases of their own because the bootleggers collect
Oh, yeah.
these underground titles. Anyway, through the bootleggers, myself, other engineers from that period, Michael was able to put together a pretty good notion of one of the what some of the top titles would be,
Mhm.
and he could start planning for the posthumous releases. And,
Yeah.
there was some remixing that had to happen because some of the best songs didn't have a mix. It was just the board mix, that got printed to cassette or something.
I wanted to ask you a question as far as the vault. Anything on your wish list that you hope sees the light of day, whether recorded or a concert video? Because I know a lot of pro shot things happened while you were there or that you've
Mm,
heard after. Do you have anything on your wish list?
Personally, not so much, but I think for Prince's reputation, for his legacy, I've said this to Michael Howe, who was no longer involved with the estate. The poor man had to catch a break, but
Yeah.
it was a really tough task. But future generations, if future generations are gonna know Prince, the youth of today aren't gonna realize how great he was from listening to his recorded music because they are accustomed to recorded music being quantized and auto-tuned, pitch and time corrected. They
Mhm.
don't realize how good is. So my personal wish would be to have live concert footage released
Yeah.
so that the youth of today can see this is how good these players are. This is
That
how good is, kids.
I sign up exactly what you're saying because when they released the Glam Slam thing, I think from '92, Diamonds and Pearls, just before they went out, it was I love that kind of stuff. I could watch it over and over some parts of the concert, and yeah, especially shows we haven't seen the light of day. I'm sure they're there somewhere and hopefully restored correctly, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Berkeley College, a very College of Music, which is you're a big part of it, and you still continue to teach. You just came back from Spain. What is the environment over there? And I got to give a shout out to Barbara Thomas, our mutual friend. So
Yes.
who's always a great one for us. So Berkeley College of Music, how did you get involved with that school and what's it like?
I was in Montreal at McGill, and I was finishing up the last year of my PhD, and I was contacted, and they said that Leanne Unger in the music production and engineering department, recording engineer, Leanne was going to be taking a leave of absence for a year to go on the road with Leonard Cohen.
Okay.
Leonard's an engineer for a lot of years, and they said, "We've got an opening. Would you come? Could you come teach for us?" And it was great. I mean, it was a great offer, but I hadn't finished my PhD dissertation. I'd finished the research. I just hadn't written this 350-page dissertation. And they said, "We'll hire you ABD, all but dissertation." And it was just the right opportunity. So I said yes. And I went to Berkeley in the music production and engineering department on the condition that they also let me write and teach music cognition and psychoacoustics for them as well. So they said yes to that as long as I taught music production courses. And so I came down there and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the kids. I like the students very much. And
Right.
we had really good times. I was with them for 15 years, teaching in two departments. And
Mhm.
then I my book was released. I turned 65. I wanted to live in the country. So I still teach for Berkeley, but no
Right.
longer teaching on campus. The Department of Music Production and Engineering was and is fantastic. Uh, it's changed drastically because, as you know, today, any kid with a laptop can and does call himself a record producer, although they've never produced a record for a living. They
Right.
fill that out uh, under the line profession in their tax form every April, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, could you sense from students a good portion of them wanted to eventually become a recording artist, or do you have a mix of some wanted to behind the
Yeah,
scenes or
truth is that at least truth is that the majority harbor a desire to be known as recording artists.
okay.
Slim majority. The
Mhm.
rest want to genuinely be, I say genuine as if the others aren't genuine, but they are, um, music educators, music business managers, record producers who might be composers and arrangers but are not artists, mixers, engineers, sound designers, all sorts of things that those great Berkeley students do. But I think I've seen that slim majority would like to ultimately release music as artists. That's a different lifestyle today than it was
Mhm.
in my day because you can have a following. You wouldn't necessarily be making a lot of money, but you can have a following releasing music without touring. So you can be an artist on the side, is what I'm trying to say.
But it helps when they're out there touring, getting those
Yeah, yeah.
gigs, yeah.
If you're gonna be an artist as your full-time career, you kinda have to go out and perform, I think, in order
Yeah.
to make a living, unless
Or
you're
be
very
a TikTok star, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, I've never seen a TikTok, so I'm not sure what the
Yeah.
deal the kids have explained it to
I
me.
just heard of it.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
being facetious there, I really I
Yeah.
know they're little, very short little videos.
Right, right. Yeah, so a couple things I just wanted before I bid you adieu. Um, of all the songs that you've worked with Prince that specifically the ones that he gave away to other artists, are there any songs that come to mind or song that comes to mind you wish he had released it for himself and you the version that he recorded?
Hmm, I've never been asked that question before.
I should have sent it the question before.
No, no, that's interesting. Uh This one wouldn't have been appropriate lyrically, but it had a nice hook, the song "Sugar Walls."
Yeah,
I
Gene
remember
Easton, yeah.
that had a nice hook. Trying to think of things he gave to others. Yeah, he some of the nice pieces that he wrote for female singers would have had to have been treated differently for
Mhm.
him. Um, I would have been interested in hearing him do Bobby Z's song "River Run Dry." Bobby
Oh,
wrote that
yeah,
on the
right, off of Bobby's record, yeah, and The Family, yeah.
yeah, what a Prince version of that would have sounded like.